This program was produced and is copyrighted by the American Philatelic Society. All rights reserved. With members in more than 110 countries, the APS is the largest nonprofit organization for stamp collectors in the world. Founded in 1886, the APS serves collectors, educators, postal historians, and the general public by providing a wide variety of programs and services. Among the many services provided to its members are a monthly 100-page magazine, access to the largest philatelic library in the United States, and a variety of educational offerings. Now let me welcome our two instructors, Mr. Ken Martin and Mr. Scott Tiffany. Ken is APS Director of Expertising, and Scott is the APS Director of Information Services. It's a pleasure to work with both of them. And so now it's time to begin. We have lots to learn and two knowledgeable instructors to help us. So, Scott and Ken, you're now in the hot seat.
Thanks, Kathy. Disclaimer as well, I should say, neither Scott Tiffany nor myself are accountants or attorneys. This isn't meant to provide legal advice. Everybody's situation is a little bit different, so everybody's encouraged to consult with appropriate individuals to review the suitability of their own personal arrangements. We will, to the best of our knowledge, give correct information and so forth, but we can't give legal advice or accounting advice. So there's 5 questions here, which sort of are an overview of what we hope you will take away from this, a lot more details than what you'll take away. It would be helpful for us to get some sense of the audience by getting answers to these questions.
So the question is, do you have a written estate plan, meaning a will, a trust, or something like that? I will close the poll, and then let me share the results with you. 86% of you have a written estate plan. So, wonderful. And Ken, do you want the next question?
Yep, please. Yep, I think we may be preaching to the choir a little bit in this presentation based on that, but that's great. I'm glad to see that so many do have an estate plan.
So, does your written estate plan specifically address provisions for your philatelic material? So, yes, no, or I don't have a written plan. So, I will close and share the results. 15% of you have provisions for your philatelic material. Third question. Have you discussed your philatelic holdings and your intent for them with your family or heirs? And again, the voting is feverish. And I will close the poll. Oh, you'll find this to be very interesting. Look.
Wow, 50-50.
50-50. It's like we could have staged that one. All right. Question number 4. Do your family members or heirs have a realistic sense of the value and highlights of your collection? So let me close that and share the answer, where 73% said no. And then one more question. Have you identified one or more individuals to help your heirs handle your philatelic estate? All right, let me close that and share this last result.
Oh, better than expected.
Yes, more than a quarter say yes.
Yeah. I think in some ways people have taken this course are almost preaching to the choir and the need for an estate plan. So a couple of these first questions may seem a little bit trivial, but I think it doesn't hurt to think about some of them anyway. And for those who haven't, 14% of you, I'll try to give you some reasons to encourage you to do so, hopefully sooner rather than later. these are pretty basic things, but obviously there can be financial implications if you have a plan versus if you have no will or no trust or whatever. Different states and how property may pass, you're more likely to have probably disputes, which may cause delays or may rack up attorney fees if you don't have a plan of some sort. So most people want their heirs to get as much as possible from them, so that normally having an estate plan will help you achieve a higher percent. Second, certainly most people probably would like that their intentions are carried out. Their intentions can be a number of different things, which I think I've covered a little bit on another slide, and most family members want to carry out the wishes of their deceased relative. Certainly, in fact, sometimes we hear from people who basically are frozen because they didn't know what their relative would want done with the collection, and they don't want to make any mistakes, so to speak. Which feeds into the third thing. A lot of families where there's just one stamp collector and nobody else in the family is a stamp collector, basically see handling the stamp collection as a burden. They know little about it, and they don't want to make mistakes. And what do I do? So whatever we can do in advance is certainly possible. I already mentioned the possibility of conflict. I mean, one of the things I classically refer to is the case where APS was in the estate of a collector, a member's that passed away in California, and it went on in court 10 years before there was basically 10 years of attorney fees took half of the estate, including half of what the APS would get. So anything you can do to reduce possibility of conflict in advance is generally positive. 14%, we didn't ask or try to do a correlation with age. I don't know the age of the individuals on here, but don't think that, unfortunately, none of us are immune to unexpected occurrences, whether it be a natural disaster or health issues or whatever. I could cite a couple APS members who are very prominent collectors who passed away much earlier than expected. For example, David Straight, who the digital catalog for the library is named after. I think he was in his mid-50s maybe when very unexpectedly. So it's rarely too early to start planning. And another thing, in some cases, this may be related to increasing the chance that your intentions are carried out, but many collectors want to see their stamps passed on, and they've gotten lots of enjoyment from their stamps, and they would like those stamps certainly not to be used for kindling in the fire for heat in the winter, but to be preserved, to be enjoyed by others. And that's certainly more likely if you have plans in place. So while hopefully the last slide made a case why everybody should have an estate plan, not everybody's estate plan should be the same. And it needs to be individually tailored to your goals. Some of the goals, which some of these things repeat, but certainly maybe more important than anything else to you is the financial well-being of your estate, so to speak, and that you may have different direction that you pursue than if it could be the financial well-being of a specific individual or organization. Now, if you want the material preserved by family or another institution, that may be completely counter to the financial, the first two, certainly the first one at least. And for others, it's important to them to enjoy the collection as long as they possibly can. In fact, there's, a number of studies that people who retire with a hobby have a longer lifespan and, giving away a stamp collection or disposing of it completely of a stamp collection before you pass away might even, be detrimental to your health. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to keep every single item to your last breathing second, but you may want to, if you're getting enjoyment out of it, certainly some collectors will choose to downsize gradually and, maybe reduce the number of collections they have or the number of albums they have, but still get some enjoyment from the collection for a period of time.
Does APS have examples available of inventory and location information that describe to family members or personal representative how to find the pieces of the collection from all the other debris in one's life?
I don't think we currently, but that's a good suggestion. I do think that we could come up with something along that fairly simple. Again, I have that later, but as these discussions tend to go, you branch off. So briefly, typically I suggest breaking it down into units and indicating, a very brief description. It might be 3 stamp albums, where they're located, maybe an approximate value. But it does not need to be in huge detail. Probably the most important thing is the family knows where to find the items. Are some items hidden because of security concerns, or are they in a safety deposit box, or if something is let out, if you have items on loan at the National Postal Museum, not likely, or the APS or something like that, that might be important to know. But I think that's a good suggestion. I think that's another handout that could be made, and I think I could do in the next week, and we could probably post that to the C3A if somebody's coming back and looking next, because I don't think a sample would be hard at all to do for that. And this is sort of what the one question was about. Who should handle your estate? In many ways, you should be the most qualified. You've probably, in most cases, you've built the collection. Now, if you inherited the collection from somebody else, you might not have the same level of knowledge. But if you're an active collector and you've had the collection for a period of time, you probably know what the key items are. You probably know who you've purchased it, how you've purchased it. Hopefully you have some sense of the value. I'm not saying precisely, but you certainly know whether it's $5,000 or $500,000, a ballpark. So as much as you can do in preparation or in potentially, if appropriate, doing some disposal before you're passing, you're probably the most qualified. So, but realistically, maybe you're not capable even at this point in time, or maybe you don't act quick enough and you aren't capable in the near future. One thing that you can do to help is most people have an executor in their documents, the person that's in charge of handling their estate. In most cases, in many cases, those people probably have no philatelic knowledge whatsoever. There's no reason why you can't appoint somebody else who would report to basically your overall executor who does have philatelic knowledge, who you would say up front, this is somebody I trust. They know what the material. It makes a lot more sense for them to handle the disposition of my philatelic material. Obviously, the executor would have to approve of everything, but identifying somebody else as a philatelic executor or a sub-executor is a great idea. That person could be a trusted friend with philatelic knowledge, certainly. It could be some people really trust dealers, have developed relationships. It could be a dealer from whom key items were acquired. Again, they would probably have lots of knowledge. Now, if they may also be a potential buyer, though, and that would probably be a conflict of interest. If you're a member of a stamp club, maybe it's a friend in the stamp club locally. I have the APS Estate Advisory Service, but that is a service that we provide. There are a lot of requests, but that should really be seen as the last choice. We do try to have somebody who would come to your home to look at the collection, to try to provide some overall advice and knowledge, what's more important or more valuable, what might be appropriate ways to sell or whatever. But somebody else who already has some familiarity, who you could show the collection to, go over the collection. I'm executor for a couple people, and even I was for Bill Bauer, former APS president. And long before before he passed, and he passed way too soon and unexpected as well, he went through and basically showed me his collection. And no, I didn't know everything. Yes, it had been 2 or 3 years since I'd seen it, but I certainly had a leg up on coming in not knowing anything else. If you have a stamp club friend or somebody else who you want, give them a tour of your collection, point out the key items to them, help them in advance, and they'll be strides ahead of where somebody from the estate advisory service coming in not knowing anything, spending no more than 1 day under normal circumstances, and some collectors have a huge amount of material, so they're not going to be able to look at everything. They may not understand how you identified key items, or may not even find some things that you put in a different place because you thought it was more secure. So some suggestions, and these are largely from phone calls the APS receives. I actually probably receive multiple phone calls on the average day related to inherited collections estates. I have for many, many years. So I have a number of horror stories. I have some good stories, but one of the horror stories would have been, I can't remember, it's during the pandemic, but a family called about 6 months after the member had passed away. They thought the collection was worth virtually nothing. They had taken it to Goodwill, and then about 3 months after taking it to Goodwill, they got a renewal notice for Philatelic Insurance. I believe it was for an $85,000 policy. They thought the collection was worth, nothing basically, certainly under $500. They wanted advice on how to get it back from Goodwill. Sorry. 3 months later, chances are that's not there, and I had no advice. So I think this is one of the number one problems or things. Certainly, many collectors are very private. There's nothing wrong with that. Some collectors don't want their spouses or family members to know how much they're spending on their hobby. That may be okay. I mean, I know collectors who have separate credit cards that their spouses don't know about, even, for example. But I would strongly, if that's the way you are, somewhere among your estate documents, please, even if you don't want to before your passing, please, provide some sort of indication of a value, a range. I'm not saying that you need to get an appraisal. I mean, it may not make any sense whatsoever. I'm not a strong fan of appraisals because they can cost a fair amount and they don't make any guarantee. And, it could be 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years later, and that who knows how much that appraisal would hold up. But you should have some sense of the valuation, and at least, a range or whatever. If you don't want to during your lifetime, at least share that. They tend to be extremes. There's other people who've told their family, my collection is $250,000. It's worth $250,000. They're using catalog value, and most of the stamps are 25-cent catalog value, and they'll be lucky to get an offer for $1,000 or a couple $1,000. And when the family goes to Mystic, and Mystic says, contact the APS about donating it, they think Mystic is trying to rip them off, because, this collection was worth $250,000. So, worth, so to speak, catalog value or whatever. It might be 1,000 copies of one 25-cent stamp, all figured at 25 cents, when, if you got $1 or $2 for all 1,000 copies, you're doing well. So do not hide or inflate the value. That just leads to problems. Share your interest with family. Again, I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are calling. They want us to tell them what their husband or father would have wanted done with their stamp collection. chances are I have never met this person. Even if I have met the person, I probably don't know them well enough to answer that question. Um, many say, "Well, I think," and that's great. But if you have specific interest in uh, maybe you are a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout, and a portion of your collection you want to be donated to Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to use for merit badge programs or something like that, or um, but share any interest with family that will help prevent families from uh, being worried about taking any action and just letting, because they're afraid they'll do something wrong, and they'll just let it sit and they may let it sit in a non-ideal climate, and it actually deteriorates, or it's infested with insects or something in 20 years when nothing's done. So share your interest with your family. Have contingency and backup plans. Even if an institution has agreed or said they would be interested in your collection, 10 years later, that may not be the case. Times change. Not many organizations will agree to take a collection and keep it as the collector had it and maintain it. Very few organizations, the APS basically can't even offer something like that. But have contingencies and backup plans. If you may have identified a trusted philatelic advisor to serve as that philatelic executor, but they may pass away before you. So, think about that. Take another look at your estate plan every few years to update it as need. And stress the care of collection. And people often call and they're worried, what should I do? I tell them, short term, if the collection is in a environment that you or I would feel comfortable living in, it's going to be fine. It should be fine for a short term. That generally means not in an attic that gets to 150 degrees in the summer, not in a basement that floods every time it rains, because you or I probably wouldn't be comfortable in those environments. I mean, yes, the National Postal Museum or the Smithsonian may have ideal, temperature, humidity, other things, but that's unrealistic for most of us. And for a short-term period of time, I don't expect anybody whose loved ones has passed away to put the stamp collection as the most important thing to be processed. I mean, you have grieving, you have lots of other things that will need more immediate attention. But for a reasonable period of time, as long as the collection is in an environment that is suitable for the average person, it should be fine. That same environment might not be sufficient if you're talking a long 20-year period or something, but for the short term, it should be good. So some of the steps that I suggest, and we talked a little bit about inventory of collection. Let me stress, this is not an inventory, or I don't recommend stamp by stamp inventory. I mean, I do have a picture there of Easy Stamp, which is one of the two main software programs that could be used to inventory. Many people will just use an Excel spreadsheet, but most of us, the majority of our collections are relatively low cost items. Now, if every item in your collection would sell for $1,000 or more, maybe you do want an item by item inventory of your collection. I doubt that most of the people on this call are in that league, though. So it's segments. Okay, I have a German collection. I have my U.S. collection. I have my philatelic literature. I have my exhibit of transatlantic ship covers. In most cases, you'd be talking a dozen or fewer units. And again, I will work on putting together a basic sheet that we can post, but a brief description of the contents, maybe even attach a photo of them if you can. You can do photos with your phones and other things now very easily. Where it's located, some idea of maybe what it's worth, and if there were any promises made. This is another thing that people, in fact, it doesn't even hurt to say in an estate document that no promises have been made regarding the disposition, because there are suits that can go on forever and can use up money of the estate where two different people say they were promised first right to purchase something, or or that an item was supposed to come to them, even though it may not be specifically documented in that will or estate document. Anything you can do to reduce conflict and to document any promises will be good. And then contact information. So occasionally, it's been a while, thankfully, but somebody will call me and, my husband had said to use this person, that he would help me with the sale of my collection, but I don't have a phone number. I don't have an email. I don't know who it is. Or maybe I did have a phone number or an email, but it's out of date. And in some cases, I may be able to use the APS member database and make a good conclusion. They live in the same geographical area. They're a stamp dealer, or they're an officer of a stamp club or something, and help out with that contact information. But when they call and say, I was supposed to contact John Smith, good luck. Even the APS probably has 50 members with the name John Smith. Contact information not only for anybody who's supposed to help with your collection, but if you have insurance, contact information for the insurance policy for the collection, contact information maybe for any firms that you've identified as potential good buyers, or auction houses you've had discussions with in advance for selling your collection on your passing. And again, try to look at the contact information every few years and update it. But it's very important to have some of that information, just a name without any identifying information. I mean, just as if you're doing if your will is giving a portion to the APS, most people would put in the APS or the APRL federal ID number, and maybe our address and our phone number. Similarly, do something similar for an individual being referenced in any documents. And yes, Scott, Tiffany, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Ken. So a lot of what Ken's already talked about applies to your philatelic library, your philatelic literature as well. The reason when Kathy sort of suggested this as a session, usually we just do it regarding your philatelic material. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to also discuss any philatelic literature that you may have, your library that you may have. I know one of the calls, and Ken gets these calls about philatelic material. We get this call fairly frequently, I would say about once or twice a month. Somebody's inherited a philatelic library or philatelic literature that their collector had, and they don't know what to do with it. And a lot of times it's very generous of them. They're donating it to us. But I thought this would be an opportunity to sort of walk you through a little bit of what you should be thinking about in terms of estate planning. If you or the person that you know of that collected this material has a large enough library that you really want to sort of start walking through some of the steps of what to think about when you're estate planning. So I'm going to go through a lot of the same sort of topics that Ken just mentioned: material types, format options, bibliographic information, specialized notes, as well as document storage locations. So as many of you know, if you do have a philatelic library or a collection of philatelic literature, there's a number of different types of materials that are involved in that. And this can help when you're sort of doing an inventory to sort of at least give that person, if you're not around and if they have to sort of look over the collection that they have on the bookshelves, to sort of distinguish between the different types of material. The obvious one, of course, is books. There's many different types of books, but that's probably the principal one that when somebody's donating material to us in the library, they're donating books. So that's an important material type to know. The other one is probably the two most common are books and journals. So I'm sure over the years have collected your American Philatelists or Lynn Stamp News in this case, or any other types of journals. Those are often donated to us as well. A lot of times the person donating it doesn't know what these look like. So I just thought this would be an opportunity just to give you an idea of the different types of material. Not all materials are the same. Probably the one, if somebody's sort of going over an inventory of a collection that they may not be very aware of if they're not a philatelist, are auction catalogs. I have to admit, when I started here in the library, I had no idea that there were this many different types of auction catalogs and auction houses. And so this is a type of material. These are two examples of what are called name sales. So they're in someone's name, or they're about a particular sort of collecting interest, and they're called name sales. And these can come in hardcover, soft cover as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about those format types later. But just another example of the different types of literature that you may come across in your library. This is the one that's probably your non-philatelist person might not know about, our stamp catalogs. And these can come in different types. This is the Scott catalog on the left and the Mikko catalog on the right. But there's all sorts of different types of these catalogs on all different types of languages as well. So when you're starting to put it together in inventory, depending on how detailed you want to be, this might be a sort of a way of distinguishing the different types of material. Or if you're thinking now, while you have the opportunity to sort the material while it's on the bookshelf, you can sort it by these different types of format types or material types. Also, Ken talked a little bit about exhibits. I'm talking in this sense about exhibits that are published. So this isn't with the actual sort of material in them, but these are photocopied or copied and then put together as sort of in book form as an exhibit. The other things I didn't mention, I don't have in my list here, are some ephemera material like maps or posters or things like that. We had a large stamp poster collection donated to us many years back. So things like that are also relevant in terms of the different material types. But I thought this would be an opportunity for the person who may not be the collector to understand the different types of literature that might be in your library collection. So now when we start about, I won't go into too much detail about the different types of options that you have available to you for inventorying your collection. Detail, as Ken mentioned, with stamps is all up to you, but there are different types of ways of sort of inventorying the collection. I would not suggest a handwritten list of material. Those things can get lost, they can get damaged, all sorts of things. You can use sort of just the standard things. Ken's mentioned Excel spreadsheet. You could use a Word document. So there's those types of software out there. And the reason I always sort of suggest and tell people to document it in electronic form, and then you can save multiple copies. So store in different locations, like store a copy maybe on your laptop or your home computer, but have multiple copies of it just in case something happens to the one computer. As we all know, we have computer issues from time to time. And there are also a lot of great apps that are out there that you can put on your phone that make this whole process really, really simple for inventorying. And again, depending on how detailed you want to get, there's some options there, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later. Ones that all you need is a phone with a camera on it, and you can sort of take a snapshot of the book, either the title page or the ISBN number, and it'll automatically populate the database for your particular book or item. So what types of bibliographic information should we have in our inventory? And again, this gets back to how detailed you want to be when you're sort of itemizing the material in your library. So I always say author, title, date, and I'll get into a few other things. Those are the main ones. But when you're talking about things like auction catalogs, you may want to sort of put the name of the auction house, for example, along with the title. There's also a span of years. When I say span of years, I don't mean when you're collecting things like journals, for example. I wouldn't necessarily do every particular issue. This is volume 1, issue 2, whatever like that. I would say I have the American Philatelist, or I have a collection of the American Philatelist from 2005 to 2010 or something like that. That works just as well. I mean, you may have some issues missing or something like that, but that gives the person a general idea of what's in the collection. Sale dates, this applies, and sale numbers, these both apply to auction catalogs. If you want to put the sale dates that are covered, say you have Harmer's of New York sales from 2 all the way up to 34 or something like that, that'll give the person an indication of those years as well. And if there's dates that are applied to that, again, similar to journals, if you want to say that I have all the sales for Harmer's of New York from 2006 to 2010, you can do it. You can include that in your inventory as well. Some of the more specialized notes that I would include in inventory, there's 3 here on this page that I would definitely include if you can. Condition is always an important thing when it comes to books. Is it in new condition? Is it in like new condition? Is it in damaged condition? Format refers to soft cover, hard cover, spiral bound, things like that, the typeset if you want. But the three things on this page I would definitely try and include if I can would be condition, any special features, and value. So format I talked about briefly, ISBN and ISSN, International Standard Book Number. Every book that's been registered by has a code, and it has a long string of numbers. And so that's a really sort of simple way to sort of identify a number. This particularly becomes really easy to work with when I get to, I'll talk a little bit later about the apps that you can use to populate your inventory. Edition, this is really important too. Is it a first edition, a second edition? Is it a special edition? You'll find in the area of philatelic literature that there are a lot of short-run publications. So publisher maybe put out 100 or 200, or maybe the author was the only one. Doesn't necessarily increase value, for example, but it will sort of give the person who can look at the inventory and say that this is one of, say, 200 or 100 that were ever produced. Pages, I'm not particularly that's not a necessary thing to sort of include in an inventory of a particular book or something like that, something you could include if you like. Special features are things like, is the book signed? Is it, again, a limited edition in some way? Is it gold leafed? Something like that. Is it rare in any way that you know of? Those are things that I would include in that. Value, and this gets back to the same thing Ken has talked about with philatelic material. There's a lot of sites that you can go to, Amazon, ApeBooks, eBay, to sort of get a general sense of value. There are appraisers out there that will appraise books. I don't know if there's going to be something in a philatelic library that's going to be really worth a great value. Usually age will have a lot to do with it if it's some one-of-a-kind catalog or specialized catalog. But those are the things I would think of including. Definitely condition I would include, edition, and probably value if you're comfortable with giving a value, just so the person gets a general sense of what the item might be worth. Same as stamps and philatelic material, document storage is really important to books. I'll give you an example. My wife and I have we're both book collectors. We have bookcases in just about every room in our house. We had a flood in our basement about 5 years ago. We lost a number of materials. So just like stamps, you want to sort of, any place that, as Ken said, any place that you want to live is a good place for books. Anything too hot or too cold, much in the same way with stamps, you don't want a bright light shining on them all the time. Not a good idea either. But it's always a good idea to document these things. Now, you may not have anything that's worth putting in a vault or putting in some sort of special place as a book or an item in your literature collection. But it's always a good idea. We just recently received a very large collection in which there were basically material in every room of the house. So you may want to do something on a smaller scale, like these books are found in the living room, these books are found in an upstairs bedroom or a computer room, something like that, just to document where these are. But like stamps, it's always a good idea to have them in a dry place that doesn't have too much humidity. You don't have to do, as Ken says, like the Smithsonian does and put them in a climate control, or like we have upstairs where we control humidity to a certain extent with our archival material. But it's always a good idea to sort of have those in sort of a safe place, safe dry place. So just like your philatelic collection, it's always good to have an honest evaluation of the resale value of the material. I wouldn't necessarily go book by book or journal issue by journal issue. Some of these you can group together, but there's always a difference between what we call resale value of a book and the insurance replacement value. And I'll give you an example. Back when my wife and I had this unfortunate experience in our basement, insurance would run about, they gave us sort of just a blank sort of $10 for every hardcover book and about $2 to $5 for every paperback book. They weren't interested in what the edition was or whether it was signed by an author or anything. So there's that value, and then there's actual resale value. And there's plenty of places that I mentioned before, Amazon, other places like that, that can give you a genuine sort of resale value for a book that's new or used. There are literature appraisers, and specifically there are philatelic literature appraisers. they will provide a service where a lot of times they want to see the books that you have in your collection. They can't do it by you just sending them a list of the items in your collection. They actually want to see things like condition and things like that as well. But there are philatelic literature appraisers, and I can sort of, once we're finished with, I didn't want to list them here, but once we're finished with this talk, if you want to contact me, I can certainly put you in touch if you need a philatelic literature appraiser. Book dealers will give you an idea of sort of the honest value as well as I mentioned some of the online platforms like Amazon and AbeBooks and eBay that they can give you a sense of value as well. So just like your philatelic collection, it's always a good idea to document any promises that were made. Here in the library, we receive a lot of that. A loved one has passed away, and the spouse will contact us and say, my collector wanted to sort of donate this to the library. So it's always good to have those ahead of time. If there's a fellow collector that was looking, that was promised the collection or particular sections of the literature collection, book dealers as well. Sometimes there's a promise that I will resell this collection back to a dealer or something along those lines. And I mentioned libraries. Societies and clubs also have libraries as well. If it was promised back to a society or club that that person was a member of. And for the really sort of high-end sort of material, a large collection, sometimes it was promised to an auction. Usually what happens at auction, they don't sell individual books or anything like that or material. They'll just lump it into one lot and then sell it as an auction. But that sometimes happens as well. So finally, just in the same way as Ken was mentioning about contact information, always good to contact the insurance firm, any policy regarding the books as well, collectors and appraisers I mentioned, societies and clubs. And these are just people that you should have in your estate plan that person could contact if there's anything to do with the philatelic literature that's in their library. And back to Ken.
Yeah, and while we're certainly not giving tax advice or whatever, certainly people bring up, and it's often an issue. So just a few things that you can think about. You know, if your federal tax is there's a pretty high exclusion for estates, at least for most of us that we'll never ever see. States vary from taxes on $1 to the same levels or none at all. If your intent is to give the material to family members, you could slowly, or you could give a portion of your collection to your children or others in advance of your death. You know, that may work well if you're downsizing. It may be appropriate depending on your tax situation. It may or may not be good, and your children's tax situation, but that's something that you can think about. Now, the one thing that I would point out is, generally speaking, the IRS says that actual possession has to change. That you can't write a letter or whatever and saying that, you know, I'm giving this collection to my daughter and son-in-law and still have it in your possession. IRS says, no, you did not give it to them. Basically, there have been court cases, and so generally speaking, the gift's not going to count. It's still going to be considered as part of the estate for any federal or state taxes if possession hasn't changed. Obviously, donation to a charity is possible, either just to downsize and perhaps get rid of some of the material that may not have much resale value, or to support the charity during your lifetime, maybe get some recognition for that as well, or to potentially reduce any estate tax implications. But that's certainly something. And again, you can also consider, instead of leaving the task for your estate, your family, your philatelic executor, you can sell portions prior to your death. Again, this may make more sense or not, depending upon incomes of you or the people that are being supported, or organizations that are being supported by your estate. But that's certainly something that you might want to consider or discuss with an accountant. Some resources the APS has, some of these things are on the handouts, but APS, we mentioned the Estate Advisory Service, and on the image on the left is a label. These labels are available free for members. They're self-adhesive. You can put them in each album, or you could put them in certain things, basically saying that, giving your name and your APS number, telling your heirs who they should contact for assistance in handling your philatelic estate if you've had that taken care of. And then it says if names have not been provided, you can call on the APS. So that's something that's available. Many people who've inherited collections, we refer to the APS dealer listings, stamps.org/dealers. In some cases, or many cases, people will use the geographic features of that by using filter by zip code, putting their zip code in and choosing a 25, a 50, or 100-mile radius to find stamp dealers in their area who might be willing to purchase a collection or might be willing to consider a collection. And then the chapter listings as well, I believe is stamps.org/clubs. Again, it's a database of U.S. APS chapters. Well, there's some outside the U.S., but primarily U.S. that might provide somebody locally who could help or might have contact information for a philatelic friend of a deceased member. There have been a couple articles in the American Philatelist. Scott Troutman, who's another collector who passed away way too soon, unexpected, but he wrote about several of his adventures as an estate advisor, so to speak, his experiences, and you can learn a lot from that article. That is one of the handouts that we have posted. It has nothing to do with the APS, but there's a website, inheritedstampcollection.com, which I've reviewed a couple times. It's very comprehensive. I believe there's a couple hundred pages. While I might not agree with 100% with every recommendation, in general, I think the information is solid, and that's something that you could access as well if you would like.
Yeah, just the same thing along with Ken is talking about for philatelic literature. A couple of one of the really good resources is a website called biblio.com. Now, it is a bookseller or book dealer, if you will, with a lot of rare and sort of one-of-a-kind books and things like that. But they have a really good page about book collecting. It talks about things like thinking about your estate planning, thinking about conservation and preservation of literature. Gives you a lot of good ideas in terms of how to go about inventorying a collection, definitions for things like what is considered a first edition, what is how to authenticate, say, a signature that may appear in a book. I mentioned earlier about various apps that you can use for your phone. You can certainly use things like Word and Excel just on a computer, but some really nice, these are 3 apps. I've used all of them. They're really handy. The great thing about them, they all sort of will work with a camera. So if you have a camera on your phone and all you need to do is take a book and there's this barcode on the back of the book, or all you can do on the publication page is take a picture of the ISBN number that I was telling you about, and it'll automatically populate the database with all the necessary information, author, title, publication. So it's all 3 of these do a really quick and easy way to sort of create a really quick inventory if you have a barcode and ISBN number. But it also allows you to manually put in things as well. So all those are really interesting. In terms of valuing, and again, I'm only using things where we're talking about doing this yourself. If you want to put value to any of these, there's the large Amazon, eBay, AbeBooks. AbeBooks has a lot of philatelic literature, and it's a collection of booksellers from across the country, around the world actually, that are selling either used books or new books. And you can get a good sense of what something is worth on the resale market for that. Also, the last one about preservation and storage, ALA.org, that's the American Library Association. There's a lot of useful information through that link about preservation and storage of philatelic or literature in general, philatelic literature. Not only that, but I was talking earlier about maps and posters and other things like that, things that maybe a little different than you would think of just a book or a journal. It also gives really good information about that as well.
So this is just a question for everybody to think about. What do you need to try to accomplish? And maybe it's not the next few days, maybe it's the next month or whatever time period is reasonable for you. But hopefully there's at least one thing that you've gotten from this webinar that you can think about and plan to do as a next step to improve, whether it's discussing your collection with your family or showing your collection to somebody who you want to help handle your philatelic estate, or trying to reach some sort of realistic sense of value that you can either share now or have with your documents to share with the family, or maybe it's just coming up with your initial will or estate plan. But we want you to think about, hopefully there's something that at least one step, maybe you may have several steps that may be appropriate in the near future.
So there's lots of things being typed into the boxes of steps that people would like to take. But before I share some of those, should we get to some questions? At what point should one get a valuation of their collection?
I'll start. I mean, I would hope that, whenever you do your estate documents, and maybe every 5 years, you would make some sort of valuation. Now, that's not, in my opinion, that doesn't need to be an appraisal. Again, it could be, I've spent X number of dollars on. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to sell it for what you spent. Some people, in some collections, will sell for more than what was spent on. Others will be a mere fraction. But some basics, a formal appraisal that, paying for one and then potentially wanting an updated one every few years or so forth, I don't think that's necessary. But I would say that, as soon as you're having an estate plan, you're doing some of these other things, you should have some general sense of evaluation. Do you have insurance? If you have specialized philatelic insurance in your collection, that at least gives some sort of basis. Yes, that may be for the replacement value or replacement cost, which may be more than the resale value, but that at least gives a sense. Often when people call in, that's one of the questions I ask. Did they have insurance? Because they're not likely to be spending, $1,000 a year and $250,000 insurance policy if there isn't something of real value there. And if they only have $10,000 insurance, well, it's not likely that there's $50,000 or $100,000 of value there either. I mean, that's certainly no guarantee, but that's one of the things you can look at, as well as how much has been spent, how much has been spent recently, or is it spent a long time ago. But hopefully, if the collectors collected and built the collection, they should have some sense of an idea, and hopefully a better idea than just adding up catalog values. That's not, generally speaking, going to be very useful.
I think the same is true for literature. I mean, I think Ken mentioned every 5 years. I think as long as with your philatelic literature collection, you're updating it and making sure that as you add things to it, that those are included. Value is not going to change that much with literature. There may be the odd thing that increases in value, but I think the value is not as important as it is for philatelic material. But I think keeping an updated inventory of what you have is always a good idea. And the level of detail is entirely up to you in terms of how much detailed you want to make it. But I think keeping it updated is the important thing.
Yeah, especially if you sell off a huge chunk. I've run into some people who've, thought the collection was worth $250,000 or something like that, and they, but the collector sold, his 3 exhibits that were 85% of the value, and you need to update to reflect if major components of a collection are sold or donated to an organization or are given away, certainly.
Does the APS recommend anyone in our locality that could assist in evaluation of a collection?
Almost any APS dealer member, I mean, to be an APS dealer member, they have to submit references. They have to have a resale license. They have to be vetted, basically. Can do that for a fee. I would say check with a local chapter, stamp club as well. You might have somebody who's equally qualified or nearly as qualified there who would do it at a lesser cost or maybe even free. But between the dealer listings and the chapter listings and the APS website, most of the people I think that would be qualified to help with that are there.
This is a comment by Richard Kohlberg. Use care in designating where your collection goes. If you donate it to some organization and specify that it is not to be sold, it permanently takes that material out of circulation and thus limits the enjoyment of others.
And the other thing I would say is most organizations won't even accept it with those conditions.
Yeah, that's true in the library as
Very,
well.
very few organizations. I mean, even organizations like the APS or Cardinal Spellman or the Postal History Foundation are unlikely to accept material with those. Very, very rarely is the APS. If you offer APS a copy of an inverted Jenny, maybe, but at the same time, we may go ahead and sell the other one that we have because there's may not be a good business reason for us to have multiple copies. So yeah, in general, and Dick's right as well, obviously, that many of us want, enjoyment for the future. It doesn't do much good if you donate it to the New York Public Library and it sits in a vault where nobody can even see it.
Can my heirs send my stamps to the sales division and have them sell it?
Well, yes, but the but is you're going to have to become an APS member to sell through either Circuit Sales or the stamp store. And unfortunately, the person submitting has to identify and price the items. I mean, our structures do not provide. We do not have the staff to do that. That would be a huge. You might have to find somebody else to do that. It's very important that stamps are submitted properly identified. You might have stuff returned, or maybe even get a fine if there was a large amount of material that's misidentified. And if it's not priced appropriately, it could be returned as well. So yes, certainly selling through the APS Circuit Sales or internet sales is definitely an option, or maybe the Literature Clearinghouse and the Philatelic Literature Review for books. The heirs or an heir is going to need to become an APS member in general, and really needs to have philatelic knowledge or somebody helping them with philatelic knowledge for appropriate identification and pricing.
Are there individuals who offer philatelic executor services that are not looking to buy?
There are people, and if they are offering that, just like most stamp dealers offer appraisals, and first thing I tell people is if you get an appraisal from somebody, I'd be upfront and say, you're taking yourself out of the market to purchase for this because that's a clear conflict of interest. And the same would be true for a dealer who's offering estate services. And you can search the APS dealer listing under specialties. And I think if you put the word in estate, there are a small number that specifically mention they offer estate services.
Len McMaster gives a suggestion. He says he's added a page in each of his albums briefly describing the material and a stamp dealer or individual who can help dispose of it, and included that person's email and phone number. And in
Great
most
idea.
cases, he's already told the dealer or the other contact that that person has been suggested. So thank you, Len.
That's a fantastic suggestion. That would be wonderful. You may not have to do it to the scale of every album. I mean, if you have 5 albums of Germany, it may be all the same person, but that's the ideal world.
Okay, so here's the $10 million question. How do you realistically value your collection?
And you could do a multiple seminar course on that. There are different ways. I mean, looking at it depends upon the level of your items. If your items are auction level material, you can look at auction prices realized. You can look at what dealers are currently selling your material for, realizing that they're probably going to pay considerably less than what they're charging. I mean, to stay in business, as a dealer, they have to buy for less than what they sell for. You can look at catalog values, but if you do, some people would say, don't even consider any item with a catalog value of $1 or less, or some threshold like that. And they might say, for material between $1 and $10, assume 10% of catalog value, and maybe from 10 to 25, maybe assume 15%. You could go an escalated thing. When you get up to, an item that would be selling for $1,000 or more, that's probably more like what's typically going to be sold at an auction, and you might be taking more like 60, 75% of catalog value you might get up to. But catalog value doesn't take into, I mean, condition. There's so many other elements. So catalog value is really, you have to be aware of all those, and it's very complex. For most people, I don't think it's worth it to go to that level. I mean, hopefully if you have a significant collection, you have insurance on it. You came up with that insurance value somehow. That can be a starting point. Again, it may be insured on replacement versus resale value. Sure, you can pay to have an appraisal. You can have some friends or whatever look at a collection that may have more experience in buying and selling and take a look. There's not an easy answer. There's no one right answer or one right formula.
Does a philatelic appraisal for tax purposes have to be done by a licensed appraiser?
No. The IRS requires the appraiser, indicate their qualifications as part of the appraisal, basically. They're expected to indicate when, where they reviewed the material, some indication of how long they took reviewing it is typical. Any professional qualifications, are they an APS dealer member, an ASDA member, NSDA, any types of, RPSL or anything like that, how long they've been doing appraisals or how many appraisals they've done. But normally part of a formal appraisal would be a paragraph explaining the qualifications of the appraiser. But there are many people that may be accredited appraisers but have no knowledge of stamp collecting, and I would not want to get an appraisal from them of a philatelic collection.
That's true with literature appraisals too. Usually there'll be a cover letter that sort of gives the person's qualifications, what they did when they looked over the collection, and their experience in doing such things. So,
yeah, maybe their basis for the evaluation too.
Right.
And here's two questions I'm going to put together. If something is donated to the APS, how is a value established for estate and/or purposes? And does the APS provide a receipt with a stated value of the donation if the collection has not had a formal appraisal?
Those are good questions, and there's a little bit of difference between, in some cases, between an estate versus from an individual. But first, let's just take if it's from a living person. If the intent is to claim over $5,000, $5,000 or more, the IRS will require a qualified appraisal. That has to be a qualified appraisal. They define as being one done by somebody independent of the donor and the donee. So the APS cannot do that. It'd be very questionable for any APS employee. They would have a conflict of interest, or even an APS board member or something. An APS dealer member should be fine, but it should be somebody, but probably not the APS dealer member that you purchased all the material from. That would probably be a conflict of interest. So that's necessary, as well as the donor the appraiser is going to have to sign off on the Form 8283, which is going to be needed to claim over 5,000. Actually, it's going to be needed to claim even lower amounts, but the appraiser doesn't have to sign until the 5,000 threshold. And the recipient organization will have to sign. Recipient organization is not agreeing with the appraised value. They are agreeing that the material described is the same as the described in the appraisal. But it's the appraiser that has the liability if they are grossly misvaluing the collection. Typically, if something's going to a charity, a 501c3 from an estate, that is typically, again, I'm not an attorney, but typically excluded from any estate valuation. So for example, when Bill Bauer, former APS president, passed away, almost all of his estate was going to charities. So it made it much easier for New York state purposes, because you did not have to fill out everything for the vast majority of the estate, because it's basically taken out, not figured as part of the estate if it goes directly to a charity. And not every state is the same, but I don't think that's atypical. The APS does provide written acknowledgement. The APS cannot provide a valuation for gifts. The most we can do is refer to a third-party valuation. We could potentially, if somebody says, provides an inventory and says the Scott catalog value is $25,000 or something, we could acknowledge that as best as we can determine the donation matches the inventory provided. We're not going to check every stamp, and that which the owner claims or indicates as a Scott catalog value of X. But we cannot, that valuation is not good for the IRS, so to speak. For gifts under $5,000, the IRS has guidelines so that the donor themselves can set the valuation within the IRS guidelines.
Marvin has given a suggestion. He says, don't forget to include in the inventory if the collector had items out for sale on consignment to auction or has anything in APS circuits or in stamp store. Yeah. So a great recommendation.
Yeah, that's something you probably should even mention, in your estate documents or whatever. You may be selling stuff for a long period of time. Unfortunately, we have a number of members who pass away who have material and circuit sales or internet sales. In many cases, the families will just ask that to be continued to sell, and we may need something with the death certificate or whatever to change how the checks are written, so that they can be cashed by the family or the executor.
So Scott, this one is for you. Are old stamp albums considered philatelic library material, or old country or worldwide maps?
Yes, actually they are. We do, people do donate stamp albums to us, and they are considered philatelic literature, usually bereft of the stamps. They're just the albums themselves. And we do have maps, as I mentioned earlier, maps and posters and things like that people do collect and that have donated to us. So yes, it does have the same sort of, it's recognized in the same way as literature or ephemera.
Scott, can you prioritize what the APRL might want?
Sure. What we often are looking for are specialized stamp catalogs. We have a very good run of Scott and the Mickle and Yves Tellier, but what we really like to sort of prioritize are specialized country stamp catalogs. We also are interested in international auction catalogs. We have a very good, fairly complete collection of US-based auction catalogs, but we're always looking for international auction catalogs. Particularly older is always better. Obviously, there's always ones that we don't have in the collection, and we have gaps in some of our collections in terms of particularly the international ones.
Are there any philatelic literature appraisers out there?
Yes, it's a small group. There's not many of them. A lot of them don't necessarily have websites or anything like that. A few of them do, though. There's James Lee. He does have a website. He's a bookseller as well as an appraiser. There's Phil Bansner, who's based here in Pennsylvania. He's also specifically a philatelic literature dealer as well as appraiser. Leonard Hartman also has a website for selling philatelic literature, and he is an appraiser as well. And two others, Robert Dalton Harris and Bob Lamb or Robert Lamb. If you want any contact information for those people, you can certainly contact me at library@stamps.org, and I can put you in contact with them. I can't give you their contact information, but I will reach out to them for you.
Does philatelic insurance usually cover books as well as actual stamps?
Do you want to cover that, Ken?
As far as I know, most specialized philatelic insurance policies would, just like they'd cover your albums. Generally, they cover philatelic material fairly broadly, so yes.
The inventory app that you shared earlier, Scott, does it work for stamp albums as well as books?
Not necessarily. There are some stamp albums. They would need either an ISBN number or a barcode. Some stamp albums, particularly more modern ones, do. It's really meant for those, if you want to use the sort of self-populating aspect of it, where you can take a picture of the book and sort of put it in. it really needs that ISBN number or the barcode on the back of the book in order to sort of self-populate. You could certainly use the app, but then you would have to manually enter information for those that don't have barcodes or an ISBN number.
If someone would want to donate a philatelic digital book library, what plans does the APS have for receiving digital libraries?
That's a great question. We are sort of in the process right now of populating our digital database with digital content that we receive from clubs and societies. But they have to first give us permission in order for us to do that. If they give us the digital content, we can certainly then upload it to the database, or they give us the permission to scan the journals that we have here in the collection. But in terms of digital content, it doesn't mean necessarily because you have a copy of something that you have the permission to share that or to give that even to a library. We need a permission from the copyright holder in order to sort of take that digital content and use it within the library. So you would need to sort of have if you're talking about a club or society that you have, their journal in digital form, we still need a permission form in order to do that. And if you're talking about digital copies of like an ebook or something like that, that's really the copyright holder. You don't necessarily hold that permission or hold that authority to hand that over to us.
And Ken, this one might be for you. As a member of a local stamp club, what is the best advice for people who come to the club asking about inherited collections?
That's challenging. I think individual members should feel free to offer advice. I think I would stay away from it being on an official basis for a club, as the club, just for liability purposes. In many cases, the collections may not have much value, and you certainly can share that information. You could certainly share information on stamp dealers in your area, or if you have any members you think might be interested in, or people that you think are nearby that might be able to do appraisals. I'd just be careful of offering or promising things that in the litigious society that we're in today.
And we have a comment from Robert who says, a lot of the details like the material, valuation, stuff on loan, etc., tends to change pretty often. And you don't want to redo your will every time that your situation changes. What I have done with my estate lawyer is to document in my will what I desire for the disposition of my overall collection to be, and then make a reference to an appendix that I keep updated on a regular basis. And that's included by reference into the will. So any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's the perfect approach. You certainly don't want to be updating your will every time you purchase or sell a stamp or do something with that. You want a general reference in your will or estate documents, and then if you can reference some sort of inventory or some sort of document that has more detail that you can update on your own at any time without involving the expense of an attorney or something like that, that's certainly the way to go.
And I am going to share some of the results from the question of what's your next step going to be. So I took the top 4 answers of what people said, and number 4 was develop or update their current estate plan. Number 3 answer was appoint a philatelic executor. The number 2 most popular answer was talk to my family. And the most popular answer, what do you think that might have been?
I like the first 3.
The first 3 are all good. Yeah.
Yes.
Start or update an inventory was the one mentioned most often. And along with that, something that was mentioned a lot was valuation of a collection. So those of you with a C3A Learning Platform account that are members of the APS, you have access to the video, What is My Collection Worth? And that was done by Richard Kohlberg, and it includes a video and a sample inventory. So you may want to look at that. It gives you the ins and outs of figuring out how much your collection is actually worth. And with that, what would be your final comments be for the group tonight?
You go ahead, Ken.
Well, I guess I'm very pleased with the next steps. I think those are all important. I think the most important thing is sharing information. The lack of information, I think, is probably lack of information shared with family members, with heirs, and so forth is probably the greatest issue that people have. And so certainly discussing with family your intents and your plans is likely to reduce the chance of conflict between heirs or something like that, likely to prevent, an expensive stamp collection just being given to Goodwill, or hopefully if your collection isn't worth that much, you share that as well. And so, your heirs don't panic or aren't, feeling that everybody in the hobby's out to cheat them when they're not offered, the $250,000 catalog value of the collection. The only other thing I'd say is it's great that people want to do inventories. I just stress again that inventories, generally speaking, unless you have nothing to do and you enjoy doing it, I wouldn't expect an inventory to be on a stamp by stamp basis. It would be units. Most people's inventories, I would think, would be no more than a page or two, and that should be sufficient with a brief description, perhaps the number of albums, perhaps the year date range, is it stamps or literature, the location the material is, and an estimated value, something along those lines. But it's supposed to be a enjoyable and fun hobby, and maybe some people would, but if you have 100,000 stamps, we could spend our lifetime, creating an inventory, and then, every year trying to update the catalog value. You probably wouldn't have any time to actually enjoy your stamps. So just do what you think is appropriate.
And I would share the same as Ken. I mean, communication is the key. Let people know your intentions about what you want to do with your collection. When it comes to literature, we often forget that. I know in this hobby that many of those in this hobby have large, either small or fairly large philatelic libraries. It's always good to think about that too, about what you're going to do with that. Whether you want to share that with family, whether you want to sort of donate that, whether you want to sort of have it as part of your philatelic collection along with the stamps and things like that. It's always good to I would sort of agree with Ken too. I don't think you need to necessarily go a book by book sort of inventory. I think a lot of times just pick out the ones you think that might have some value, some significance, whether they're in great condition, like catalogs or things like that. And if it includes things like journals or auctions, you can sort of make a larger sort of heading, if you will. I have so many H.R. Harmer catalogs. I have so many issues of this particular journal. You don't have to go into the fine details if you want to do that. I mean, I tend to be that way when it comes to books in my collection, but not everybody is that way. So I would just stress again what Ken has said. Make your intentions known. It was great to have so many people as part of this session. I'm willing to sort of answer any questions that have to do with your philatelic literature. If you want to contact me, or my contact information is on the website. Really enjoyed this session, and if you have any questions about anything to do with your philatelic library, please feel free to reach out to me.
I might just add, Scott sort of touched on this, but part of that inventory might be your 5 best items, your 10 best items in your collection. Certainly, if your heirs or somebody's going to sell it, if you can easily point out what the key items, the best items are, that's, that you have good items. They don't have to search to find, the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. That might be a useful addition to that inventory.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
And Scott, thank you so much. I've learned so much from your session, and it just tells me how much work I need to do on a personal basis. So thank you so much. And the people who attended are better for listening to your presentation. Thank you. This copyrighted program was produced by the American Philatelic Society and may not be reproduced without the written permission of the APS Education Department. Be sure to visit the APS website at stamps.org to learn more about what the American Philatelic Society has to offer.